Good morning and welcome back to the proceedings of Day 3 at Dhaka Media Summit 2022. The summit, jointly organized by the Media Studies and Journalism Department, University of Liberal Arts Bangladesh, and International Associations for Media and Communication Research, IAMCR Bangladesh. Now we'll move on to a masterclass entitled Hyperreality and Contemporary Hollywood, a rework of history or a masterful construction of reality. The session will be conducted by Dr. Ari Santoso, Widodo, Poespodihardjo, and Dr. Rudi Sukandar from LSPR Communication and Business Institute, Jakarta, Indonesia, one of our associate partners. Before I hand over the screen to the resource persons, let me take this opportunity to briefly introduce them. Dr. Ari Santoso Widodo is currently the director of e-learning program at LSPR Communication and Business Institute, Jakarta, Indonesia. Before joining LSPR, he worked for Marco Buana University. Earlier in his career, Dr. Ari Santoso worked as a journalist for the Indonesian Observer, SW Magazine, and SWA Business Magazine, SWA Business Magazine. He earned his PhD in journalism from the University of Wollongong, Australia. The other resource person in this session, Dr. Rudi Sukandar, is the thesis director in the postgraduate program of LSPR Communication and Business Institute, Jakarta, Indonesia. He earned his PhD from University of Ohio, USA, in communication studies. His research interests include intercultural communication, diplomacy, and conflict resolution. Dr. Rudi Sukandar has 3 books under his credit, alongside a number of journal publications. Welcome, Dr. Ari Santoso and Dr. Rudi Sukandar to Dhaka Media Summit. I would like to hand over the mic and screen both to you, and would like to request you to move on from here with your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Me and Pak Rudi are very delighted and very honored to be able to join this very important event. And I think from my personal point of view, I think lecture is a little bit heavy. We would like to share what has been our interest, research interest for many years now. Although we came from different backgrounds, I'm from journalism and Pak Rudi from various other aspects of communications, especially diplomacy and intercultural issues and conflicts. But we have been very intrigued about the development of what people have perceived more like what we often call as a pop culture, and one of it is just that how it became more apparent that as we get to this stage today, how meanings are being conveyed and how reality being created, not just by what was perceived as traditional, quote unquote, traditional means like media from news reports and stuff like that, or government release, but also from what we perceive more like an innocent presentation, like, you know, Walt Disney movies and stuff like that. And for instance, many research have found out that Disney has been very not adamant, but has a very strong influence in creating gender stereotypes. How princess has to be like a princess type, wearing a nice dress and stuff like that, and much has been kind of quote unquote blamed by the representation of princesses in Disney movies. But I think that also has changed significantly in the last few years. But I think we both have seen that in the past few years, this new representation about meanings has been more and more pronounced because we are probably in consuming less and less conventional mass media, but we are spending more time with Netflix, Disney Plus, and stuff like that. And they are very much dominating the landscape or the sphere of what sort of information that we receive today, which is totally different than maybe, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, where CNN still the king, MTV still rules the wave, and stuff like that. So we would like to do a little bit presentation about it, and of which then I would like to, but before Pak Rudi present his part, which is more into the Hollywood part, I would like to give a little bit on the bridging side on how does it relate with the journalism. Please allow me to try to share my slides. Okay, screen. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Is my slide came out in the screen yet? Is it on yet?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes. So how can we connect between the idea, the study of journalism, with something more contemporary, as we call it, like media studies, or I don't know, a pop culture studies or something like that, that we often perceived as separate studies. My back when I was studying journalism in Australia, of which that I would like to give a homage to it in my next slide. We learned that we cannot separate journalism with the life that we have. I mean, like I want to say, we would like to say real life. I mean, like, what is a real life? I mean, right now, I think we are pretty much, it's the whole world being dominated by the news about what happened in Ukraine. And I think it has polarizing people in terms of opinion, on like asking people, like having what side are they on, and are they taking, and like why that happened. I mean, and the study of journalism, of course there are many studies, many research have found out that people are actually responding to news reports based on many things within the person itself. I mean, what is their personal beliefs on things? What is their personal experience on many issues, and what also their quote unquote ideology, and all these things becomes like an interactive process between what they read, what they see in the news reports, into what they think about the world that they are dealing with. We also saw the same, at least in terms of research. So many research have found out, like when the pandemic hits, like in place like Indonesia, the response, the perception of people towards pandemic was evidently very diverse. We have what we it's actually very polarized. We have one side that one group, a lot of people that actually questioning, was the pandemic really there or not, and there was also other group that was accepting pandemic as like close, like the end of the world. And when I did research about it, I mean, like with the group of a lecturer last year about the reporting on the pandemic in Indonesia, and we found out that it's very interesting. I mean, there was so many people who died in its very short period of time that the cemeteries were really fill up very quickly, and to open new ground, the ground staff have to use excavator, which is very gory. Like, oh my gosh, what is this? And people were looking into that kind of reports, and they were like, oh, it's really stressful. But the other people said like, yeah, but that's what the media said and something like that. So there was something in this connectivity between media, the media reports, and how people perceive it, and that's something that what we would like to share here about. Okay. So a little bit about myself before I continue, just to be clear. I have a background in journalism as a journalist, and I was also a photojournalist. So part of my presentation here may be a little bit related with my background in photojournalism as well. And I also a graduate. I want to give a homage to my campus before, from the Graduate School of Journalism, University of Wollongong, Australia. Of which I really treasure this moment, because that's when I got the chance to learn about journalism as from an academic point of view. And I think it's very important that we keep on asking and criticizing about journalism even till today, because we still need journalism. We still need reliable source of information, and the public needs it. It's imperative that we have to have that. And when we don't discuss, we don't argue, we don't criticize about the state of journalism today and in the future, I think we're gonna lose that in terms of this whole mixture of many things. Okay, so the first point that I would like to raise is about the credo versus reality. Journalism believes in the idea that they present the truth. So when at the heyday or at the best days of conventional media, like newspaper, radio, television, with which then they supposedly following a proper journalistic ethics and standards. We want to believe, at least we want to believe that these people, these organizations wanted to, within their best capacity, to give us the best informations that they can present as a representation of quote unquote the truth. And which is totally different when we go to the cinema and watch like Avenger Endgame, and we thought that, oh yeah, that's a fiction. It's not journalism. But but there are scholars that, like Edward Said or even Gramsci, that has argued that what we think as a perceived an innocent representation on to the screen, or as what we thought as a fiction, actually has more influence within our mind about how we perceive the world. We will discuss that later. But so Edward Said, for instance, also has said has strongly criticized the mainstream media. He said that, who says that media is actually representing the truth, he said. In reality, media or journalism, if it's not carefully scrutinized, it's actually cementing as a very specific idea or ideology that it's not really misleading, but actually taking the public into a certain directions. So as a general warning, I would like to say that my presentation here will follow into more a critical interpretive tradition rather than following a normative point of view. So I'm questioning here whether journalism can remain true as presenting their credo, represent the truth, because then in a conflict like what happened in Ukraine, I think John Pilger, if I'm not misquote him, said that the first victim, first casualty of conflict or war is the truth. I would like to share initially photos of an American Civil War, of which the American public were so shocked, and they look into it, and they felt, because in the photos it was shown a field, what's supposed to be a former battlefields after the battle itself, where of course during the Civil War the combat was done very close, so there were so many casualties like lying around, and American public was so shocked to see that how it looks like, because never before they were given such visual or graphic presentations, and it has a very strong effects about how the American public at the time perceived the Civil War. But not all of those photographs turned out to be the truth. Some of it were actually doctored or made. So even back then, there was already a big problem about truth in journalism. And yeah, so this is the beginning. Okay, my first case studies that I would like to present here is about Stephen Glass. I think personally, I think anyone wants to do serious journalism should learn about what happened to the magazine, the New Republic, as that's a nickname or a credo, saying the only entertainment, the only magazine on a print magazine available in U.S. Air Force One. I mean, it's the reading for the American president and the top end of the American establishment. And in 1994, New Republic recruited a new and very ambitious young journalist, Stephen Glass, and when he became when he was in the early 20s, I think 23 years old, he became the youngest, and at the time was dubbed as the most brilliant journalist. So it's very very prestigious position to become a full-time journalist and writer. And yeah, but in 1998, one of his articles titled "Hack Heaven," you can watch this episodes in a movie called Shattered Glass, ran into a problem. One publication wanted to follow through the story, which happened very often, and immediately this other competitor media found out that some of the facts did not match. They found a lot of anomalies. So they did eventually ran a full investigation, and they found out that it is more than questionable. I think they believe that the facts presented in the article were false and actually fabricated, which is totally a sin in terms of journalism. But when you were talking about fiction, that's a totally different matters. And later, when that came to the attention of the New Republic, they found out that from 41 articles that Stephen Glass wrote, he actually fabricated or manufactured or manipulated 27 articles out of those 41. And in the movie, the Shattered Glass, one of the characters said that why he Glass can get away from doing so is because it's entertaining. People love what he wrote, and they want to swallow it as a facts, and did not even want to bother to challenge the facts there. Either they can't, or they just simply doesn't want to, because it's simply too entertaining. So entertainment goes into the line of journalism, and suddenly the line becomes very blurry. And yeah, this is him. This the some with some of the articles that so even if we are not careful, journalism can be fiction, and fiction can be journalism. So fiction can be facts, facts can be fictions. So that will be the part of the reality. So I'm going to giving more a little bit or the theoretical foundation in it. I mentioned about Edward Said. Edward Said was also well known, mostly well known with his works on Orientalism, and he believed that it's not just a loose occurrence that media made wrong or false reporting, so just mistakes. No, he Edward Said believes that it sometimes sometimes the media reports, like in the U.S., can be so biased towards a certain issue, certain things that they believe so strongly that they're willing to forsake other aspect of it, just simply to present a certain idea over and over again. This is like what you see in the comic book. Marvel and DC Comics had a long differences on their view. Into like the issue of minorities, like gender and race, for instance. DC was quote unquote accused to be slow in adopting the minorities in their characters. I mean, it took a long time for DC to have someone from African American background to become a superhero, and for many decades, their superheroes has to be tall, big, and white, Caucasians. Doesn't have to be blonde, but Superman has a blue eyes and wearing a blue, and his uniform is like representing the greatness of the U.S., and it's been known for many generations. But Marvel, on the other hand, Stan Lee wanted to do something as an alternative. So when he created Marvels, he said that he embraced the minority. So he created character superheroes who are coming from minority background, female, very strong female, empowering them as just like other superheroes. And also probably we know that Marvels, they created a fictional country called Wakanda, which was located in Africa, in deep in Africa, which they celebrate their culture proudly. They're proudly being Africans, but they are also amazingly advanced in terms of technology. Even said that almost maybe better or than many other developed countries in the world, simply because then Stan Lee said that he wanted to create a balance. People perceive countries like and continents like Africa with just like nothing, and then yeah. So this is like a counterbalance. Sides brought the theory, and then Stan Lee actually bring it up into a live reality. And of course, when we talk about the media and in terms of hegemony and dominations and propaganda, we cannot avoid. I think we should embrace the work of Noam Chomsky. Chomsky said that media has been for decades being used to manipulate the public opinion through the ownership of big media companies, including quote unquote like Disney, and many of television channels in the US. That was his main arguments was. So it is kind of fitting into the idea of this 21st century that whoever control informations can control the world. So because information here will affect to with the people's understanding and conscience. So Chomsky idea here can bring us into kind of an idea like, okay, what we see here may not be as what we see. There might be something, and the effect of it we cannot underestimate. And because media is also a corporations, this is also a different and interesting aspects. We are now basically our entertainment room now is basically dominated by very few corporations, and the largest one definitely right now is Disney. Disney, who start from a very modest level, creating content for kids. Now, basically, I think more than half of what came out in cinemas or in streaming from Netflix or Disney Plus coming from their products. So corporate agenda will be definitely has this own flavor to it, to this new reality. And also why then we keep on seeing like a new version of Terminators. And I think Rudi will discuss more about that part. This is more the fun part of it after this. And yeah, of course, as a bridge, we'll come to the new icon. I think Darth Vader was seen by my generation, for instance, who grew up watching him as like the utmost symbol of evil. But then right now, a lot of younger generation idolize him because he is symbolizing a power, a powerful figure, and because he's like almost like inhumans, like you can behind the mask it can be anyone. You can associate such representation of power with anyone, and therefore this can also inspire people to see power not as a negative side, but from a different angle. So just a little bit of maybe later we'll have a session for a QA, but after this I'm gonna go for the fun part. I'm gonna pass on the time and space and the space for my colleague here, Rudi Sukandar, who's gonna discuss more on the fun part on this work presentation that we do together. Thank you, and I'll pass on to Rudi. Oh, hold on. So, okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Ari.
Yes.
I think we got quite a strong foundation in terms of how we view media in today's society, on how what we perceive as real is not really something that we think as real. Because I think one of the most controversial work that was done by Baudrillard was when he wrote that the Gulf War didn't happen. And that's quite interesting on how, in so many levels, that it created lots of controversy at the time. Okay, let me just share my. You cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. I think you're still sharing, but could you? Yeah. Okay.
Done.
Let me see. Where is, here it is. Okay, is it displayed now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think before we talk more about what is it, part of the things that would be presenting today, let me just start by sharing story with you. So that way, then we can have at least from my own personal perspective on how I view reality and what is beyond reality, and see and how that affects me as a person and also as a scholar too. When I was a kid, my uncle took me to a movie. It was a midnight show. I don't know why he took me to that a very late show. And then the movie that we saw at the time was Zombie. And then, well, as excited as I was, then apparently that I got the consequences later when I got home because I couldn't sleep, thinking that some zombie might be crawling from under my bed. And then I think that also part of the things that really makes me unable to enjoy any zombie related movies. I think the last zombie movie that I saw was World War Z, I think. The one that I was unintentionally going was actually I Am Legend. I accompanied a friend of mine to a movie. I thought because it was Will Smith, and I thought it was really interesting that I want to see Will Smith in action. And apparently I was wrong, and it was a zombie movie. Despite the disagreement that came after whether or not the ending was actually the ending that was intended for the movie, because there is an alternate ending to the movie. And the next one that I would like to also talk to you is about after that, then we got a game called SimCity, and then suddenly then we got I was in that Fed too, and then playing the game. Although I think I kept failing to build a city at that time, and then I gave up. The next one, when I was studying in the US, then in the States, then there came a program called Second Life. And at the time, most of the students in my universities at the time took to the internet, took to the virtual world to create their second identity online. So it was quite interesting at the time. And then because of my curiosity, and then I just took a peek and then tried to see what it was all about, especially when I knew that one of my favorite band is called Duran Duran was actually they actually have a Second Life account too. So this is quite interesting to see. And next, after that, I was also exposed to Dune. I don't know if you saw the movie from last year's Denis Villeneuve Dune, but Dune gave me something really. I became sort of a big fan of that. I read novels, Frank Herbert's novels, and then I played the game, the original game, and then also Dune 2000, and then after that, and any other Dunes after that. And also, of course, the movies with the infamous David Lynch's versions in 1984 movie, and also the TV miniseries that was actually quite faithful to the story in the novels. And also the last one that we saw last year from Denis Villeneuve. And as the majority of my works are in conflict and also violence and also peace building and storytelling, sometimes talking to the victims and perpetrators of violence sometimes has taken me to a whole different reality. So at that point, then I would sometimes question myself, which reality am I in? Because all these horrible stories that I've heard sometimes are not reported in the media, sometimes are not shared in any other part of the medium of the stories, for example, but is there. So that way that we can see, but the things about looking at so many realities out there, and then see and we compare to our own, and sometimes we question which one is the real. And then, of course, that we can see that from Pak Ari's presentations and how media reports might not be presenting or representing the truth. But then again, working in conflict and violence, then I have been working on a database, a violence database that is based on media reports as a part of our quantitative research. So that's, I think, the opening on how sometimes working with Pak Ari on media and also and pop culture sometimes provides what is it, a venue for me to just look at into another reality that that might be interesting to see, and then without having to what is it to burden myself with the psychological effects of what the reality that I have been working on, especially related to conflict and violence and peace building. So with that as an opening, now we can see that hyperreality and films, the hyperreality is, of course, for those of you who have been familiar with Baudrillard's works, that is the generations of models of real without origin and origin or reality. So we take a look at simulacrum. A simulacra is something that replaces reality with its representation. This is quite interesting, especially when we look at on how Pari just touched a bit about Disney's and anything related to Disney's, and we will see more because Baudrillard mostly work. Some of the examples that Baudrillard used was actually on how the reality and hyper reality is actually created in by Disney and in Disneyland. So what we see here today, according to some works that I read, is that most of the films in now are more embodied in artistic commodities that are hyper real. So we're looking at into on how the movie or the films are actually in a different level of reality. And then what was really interesting is that since we look at simulacra or copies of defect things that either had no origin or no longer have any origin, or original or no longer have any origin, well, we can also see that simulation is the imitations of the operation of real process or system over time, that we can probably see more on how the idea of hyper reality in movies and films are kind of having this close connection to each other. Now, if we go further, we can see that images become more important than what they represent. We can see more and more images because we don't really look at what it represents, but more on what the images per se. So especially we look at into from the perspective of postmodernism, for example, because many believe that the recurring media images take on hyper reality. They're more real than reality. So going back into Paris' presentation before on how the media reports a war or violence, and sometimes we can see that they they reported something that is not what is conceived as real, because what's really interesting is that there's some media agenda in that too. And then that reminds me of quite a bit of debate that happened the past few weeks. There was an article by the China Morning, South China Morning Post that said that most of Indonesian actually supported the invasions of Russia to Ukraine, while the government of Indonesia condemned the invasion. Then what's really interesting is that here, whenever there is a news coming in, for example, at least in my social media feed, for example, there's always these people who are having this argument to each camp, because claiming that the report was by the media was actually because the media is just the supporters of either the US and its allies or the Russians. Now, going back to that, we can see that since they are more real than reality, sometimes that our mental pictures of the perfect body, kind of reminding me of a song by the Genesis in 1990s. called I Can't Dance, and it represented talking about a girl with perfect body, with a perfect smile, and then also a perfect house, perfect meal, vacation, and any other relationship that you have is actually have been created through exposure to recycled media. We always see that on the commercials on TV, or any, not only on TV, but also outside too. If you go around, Jakarta has become more and more like, I think in some places, a kind of imitating what is it? A little bit of New York here and there, with all the displays that what is it, that presenting all the things, consumer things that really making us having this idea about what is ideal. I'm borrowing what Duran Duran said in its song. It's called "Too Much Information." He said to buy the things that you don't need, or in something that people say is that to buy the things that you don't need to impress people that don't care. So we take a look at this, that we see that the mental pictures about these perfections, either anything that is presented by the media, it's just something that have no basis in fact. Apparently that we can have the body of a supermodel by Victoria's Secret, for example, but in reality that we can find that is not as easy as finding that in the media, while we see the what is it, the fashion show by Victoria's Secret, for example. But the problem is that this image, the mental pictures that we have had because of the exposure, is the images that create our expectation too, and sometimes it creates a problem because again, as Baudrillard mentions that it is not TV as a mirror of society, he said, but it's just the reverse. Is that the society as the mirror of television. So what we can see that we sometimes see a reality, TV as another reality, movie as another reality that is not, that's actually different from the reality that we have lived in. Actually, that's why that we call that something related to what we see as a hyperreality. So with that in mind, that we can see that it's just quite interesting to see on how some parts of the pop cultures that we have, either in written format, or in movie format, or in music, sometimes that you just put this hyper reality into their the messages into the contents of their media. So let's just take a look at this. Let me see. Am I here? Yeah. Okay. So if we take a look at into the movies right now, especially from the perspective of postmodernists, for example, is the words no longer have any references, and then according to Berton's 1995, it is no longer have any references and has lots of chaos and mixed within the science, images and themes of a world of games and imagination and its farthest range. So I think it might be quite a work for anyone who's doing research on semiotics, for example, on movies, and see on how the hyper reality, and try to find the connection with the reality that we have. So let me see. So if we take a look at this, for example, this is just we start with 1980s, because I don't think I could go beyond that, but still because I'm most of the time that I was exposed to this, that we can see that in 1980s we can see that the movies tend to reaffirm the values of technology, fantasy, and patriarchy. If you take a look at into E.T., for example, on how what happens if we have a connections with extraterrestrials, for example, that was actually the first time for me to know that the word extraterrestrials, because this is quite interesting to connect that with the term that we sometimes for me especially heard when I watch TV. Then that was actually we that time we only have one channel, the government channels TV that was broadcast all over Indonesia, and then one of the what is it, the anchor men or women usually just say that you're watching this broadcast using our terrestrial station. Okay. And then after that, we got the world into extraterrestrials, and see on how what is it, the technology and also the fantasy that we have had connections with an aliens, especially with the everlasting questions that people ask whether or not we are alone in the universe. So it's kind of a waste with the vast what is it, size of the space. For example, only human being live on Earth in a tiny insignificant planet, even in our own galaxy. So we look at into that, and then also when we look at into Return of the Jedi, for example, if you follow the Star Wars and then a saga, especially the original trilogy, and then we can see that the technology and the fantasy are there, and then that creates this kind of reality that, okay, that might be interesting to see if there's a galaxy far away. If you remember, then the crawling text in every what is it, a Star Wars movie usually have that, and then especially it's quite interesting in a galaxy far and away. And then this creates this kind of fantasy, not to mention that with all the powerful music that was provided by John Williams, for example, which was unheard of at the time, because when George Lucas was asking John Williams to provide the opera, and then it's kind of interesting because he saw that Star Wars as a space opera. So here we can also see that, and patriarchy too, on how Pari mentions about Darth Vader, and then we can see that at the time that we can see that we haven't heard any information about female Jedi's. We only have the stories about Yoda, and then the stories about Darth Vader, who used to be a Jedi, a friend of Obi-Wan Kenobi, for example. But we don't really see that the female characters was given much in terms of the Jedi lore. But of course, Princess Leia, for example, was quite interesting because he provided a much interesting voice toward the positions of female, especially in the politics. And of course, we heard more later in the prequels about the universe that was in a Star Wars universe. So in this way that we can see that the values of technology, fantasy, and patriarchy is still there. And then sometimes now we can always see that whatever happens if that reality exists. For example, if we have a met with ET, for example, that was quite interesting too, because 2 years ago they made a commercial actually with ET coming back to Earth, and then meeting Elliot when Elliot has already had 2 children, and the children were playing with ET, and then finally they got their long awaited reunion, but only in a commercial. The next one, but what about during the 1990s? Well, in 1990s, that this is quite interesting because the idea is that it attempts to destabilize values established in 1980s and replace them with apocalyptic nightmares. For example, we look at the movie Jurassic Park. I don't remember how many times I've seen Jurassic Park, but I saw when the first time it came out, I saw it 3 times. The first one for the story, the second one for the second time was for the the CGI at the time, computer generated image, and the third time is for the music. So it's just quite interesting on how what we see as something that is happy ending, for example, that we usually have seen in many movies before, not all of them, of course, but we can see that the apocalyptic nightmares are there. Even though we didn't know that Jurassic Park at the time would become a franchise and become and has created more movies that I can count on. And the next one, of course, we have Titanic, one of the big gross movies of all time. And then also another one that is quite interesting to see on how we look at my favorite movie is actually The Dark City. If you haven't seen this movie, I suggest that you take a time to see this movie. Again, this is science fiction, and this just talks about what is real, what is reality, who creates the reality. So that one, and who perceive the reality. So I think if I talk more about this, I'm afraid that I will put spoiler on this a good movie, and I think it's quite the same thing that probably someone's watched the Empire Strikes Back and then giving you the spoilers that I am your father. So but if you want to see how hyperreality works at best, I suggest that you see the Dark City and see how human and also and any other non-human are interacting and creating this reality or what hyperreality is. And of course, we cannot talk about hyperreality without mentioning the Matrix. Now we can see that what was really interesting is about the bullet time. If we look into the Matrix, then one of the most iconic scene in the Matrix, of course talking about the first Matrix, is the bullet time is a computer enhanced extreme slow motion effects, and so but it has been used so many times that it has just lost its appeal. So but the first time it came out, and then it was quite interesting because after being used, and then the slow motion bullet time effect has been used in countless films and genres. And then of course it has become overused, and then using slow motion effect to suggest super speed, heightened awareness, and arm reflexes can be incredibly effective. But what's really interesting is that, as it turns out, based on the last report that I read, is that our brain actually provide an effect very similar to bullet time, so seeming to slow things down as we prepare to move or react. So it's just it's quite interesting on how we perceive as reality and hyperreality, and what we consider as something related to fiction is actually then depicts on how our brain works. Now, another one that is quite interesting is again the Truman Show. While we see that the Matrix is more on a computer engineered shadow world, and then the Truman Show is the opposite of that. So that we can see the world that was created, the reality that was actually created in the Truman Show was actually produced by human with emotional and which has a emotional and operational motivation, for example, into hyperreal situations that makes the actors who play Truman's friends and family got involved in that. So and that probably that we can see how they can just start questioning is it real, and then again it's quite interesting. And then the next one, let me see if it's here already. No. Okay, this is a book that if you are interested in the simulation on how the movies in 1990s. This is a really interesting book that you can see because it just talks about analysis on movies such as Back to the Future, and then all of some of Arnold Schwarzenegger's movie like Total Recall. It was neat at the time when the first time it came out, and then after they remade it a couple of years ago, and I didn't see that kind of excitement or the same kind of vibe that I found in the original Total Recall. And of course, if you're familiar with the work of Oliver Stone with JFK and Natural Born Killer, especially Natural Born Killer, is quite interesting, and see on how what is the reality, and then when a killer, for example, kills somebody that usually needs a witness. And then a big spoiler of that movie is that the killer just said that when the last victim that he was about to kill, that he just said that that is not the way for you to do your killing, because you always need a witness. But the killer says, well, I do have a witness. It's actually the media, the video camera that was actually playing that became the witness in his doing his killing. And of course, Pulp Fiction is one, and also quite interesting Fight Club and Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So this is quite interesting to talk about the Phantom Menace because it actually contradicts the assumptions that originality precedents always go together. Because Phantom Menace is an original that came after its copy. So we take a look at into prequels, for example. Is not we go into the timeline of the stories in the universe. Is actually Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, as the original. But this one is work in the reverse, because we have the copy that was Episode 4, 5, and 6, and after that it was they made into Episode 1, which is there is no any original in that, because just start that it is an original, but it does that came after the copy. This is quite interesting, especially when we look at into the culture that the statement that says that simulation is a copy without an original, without an original. And that kinds of reminds me about when we look at into alternate reality too, and which reality is actually real. Kind of reminding me of Haruki Murakami's novel IQ 1Q84, for example. Is quite interesting take on looking at into alternate reality and see when you can go back and forth between them. We're not talking about multiverse yet. This is some other things that might be interesting. Okay. So we take a look at that, then especially with, again, we can talk about Back to the Future, for example. So if we have seen the movie, that we can see that Marty McFly is less a traveler in time than a traveler in hyperreality, because exploring the kind of work exists in the wake of reversal of history. What happens after Marty came back from the past, for example? Is it the reality what happens to the reality that he has lived before? So now we have, let's say that it was the reality in 1984, that we have 1984A and 1984B and 1984C. And then if we take a look at that, it might be interesting to see and how it messes with our perceptions on what is real. So whatever happens to Martys that lived in 1984A, for example. So next one is, what about in the 2000s? We can see that in the 2000s, we have resurgence of the following genres. So some genres that have that had been abandoned before resurge again in the 2000s. For example, we are talking about fantasies like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter and Pirates of the Caribbean, for example. And then also, this is quite interesting when we're talking especially on the Pirates of the Caribbean, for example, because Pirates of Caribbean came as ride and attraction in Disneyland. So especially the things that remind me the most was a scene in when I was taking the ride. Was a scene when and some of the pirates who were in prison trying to lure a dog who has keys of their cell door, and then with all the things that they have, bones and everything. And then when the scene was depicted in the movie, especially with the Curse of the Black Pearl, the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, then I found that really quite interesting, because it took me back to the time when I was taking the ride. And then suddenly, what became really interesting is that, because going back into Baudrillard again, and he said he used Disney as an example. Baudrillard used Disney as an example on how he mentions about hyperreal. So he was convinced that we, as the viewers or the audience, are actually under the control of entertainment conglomerates, and we're no longer able to distinguish between fictional representations and reality. So I think if we go back into what Walt Disney himself said, that regarding the Disneyland, he said that I don't want the public to see the world they live in while they're in the park. I want them to feel they're in another world. So if we're not talking about hyperreality, then I think Walt Disney would probably agree with Baudrillard's statement. So it's actually as an imaginary world, but it attempts to make us believe that it is real. So what is happening in Disneyland is actually real, while anything that in Los Angeles, in Orlando, for example, they're no longer real, but belongs to some other kind of what is it degree of simulation. So that case that we can see now, when we take a look at into how the Pirates of Caribbean, for example, it has related to the idea that people increasing more people seek the Disney style, Hollywood style representation, and find it difficult to comprehend other cultural art forms of work in a different symbolic system. For example, medieval texts, for example, or experimental films or contemporary art, because we are so immersed into the Disney style and the Hollywood style representations of reality, especially when we look at that in the entertainment. And another one is we take a look at into the epic gladiator. Of course, that in Hyperreality we might not be able to see gladiator in real life, but we can see that it is partly presented in the movie. And then musical genres too there, and then Hong Kong's kung fu style emerged at the time with Kill Bill 1 and 2, especially with the Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon, for example. It is quite interesting on how this kind of genre could finally penetrate the Hollywood. And of course, with the Battle Royale, and also the coming up of computer animation and replacing traditional animation. We see Shrek, Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, and the Polar Express. And the one that I love from the Netflix right now is Love, Death and Robot. So if you haven't seen that, I suggest that you take some time to watch that, because it's kind of interesting on how computer animation that is quite appealing to the eyes whenever we see that. And also the blockbuster documentary, for example, An Inconvenient Truth, March of the Penguins, Super Size Me, and Fahrenheit 9/11. So that really reminded me of the time when I saw Fahrenheit 9/11 in movie theater in the States. And then I went there with a friend of mine, a good friend of mine. And then, of course, since we are in the United States, then we can see that many people from different political ideology tried to came up. I think mostly it was the Democrats and liberal would like to see that. And then during the time of the movie, the duration that the movie, I couldn't stop hearing all the expletive words, the swearing words that came from people sitting behind us, just to see that how the reality that was presented in the documentary Fahrenheit 9/11, Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11 was affecting them as the audience. And then of course horror movie, especially after the Blair Witch Project was done in the previous decade, for example, and it was no longer in the 2000. Now, what about in the 2010s? So I'm just taking the stop until 2010s, and then what we see here is more enhanced computer-generated imagery. So what we see as real and hyper reality, then sometimes we and suddenly that we see that there is a technology to de-age the actors. We can see Samuel L. Jackson in Captain Marvel, and especially what was I think the first time he came up was actually in Rogue One, when Peter Cushing and Carrie Fisher was the age in the movie. Not that I was convinced though on Carrie Fisher, because she looked really different than Carrie Fisher that I saw in episode 4, Star Wars episode 4. And another one is on how reality that is put in the entertainment, especially in contemporary Hollywood, is a more diversity. We can see that like a movie with minority groups actually can attract more audience too, like a movie like Creed, and then Black Panther, and then Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And then which is quite interesting, because we no longer know that Spider-Man was actually Peter Parker, but although we already have 3 Peter Parkers now, but Into the Spider-Verse, that we can see that we can also find some other Spider-Man is actually an African-American Spider-Man. Is it African-American or Hispanic American? Mike Morales, is that the name? Yeah. And then also the idea on how to present racism in the movie, like The Help and the 12 Years a Slave and Django Unchained. Those really giving up the idea on how bringing more diversity can also doesn't necessarily mean that the movie will become a flop in terms of the box office. And of course, we have the return of Ripley-like female protagonists. If you're familiar with the Alien series, then we have Ripley's starred by Sigourney Weaver, and then we can see that Lucy is there, Scarlett Johansson in Lucy, and then Star Wars Awakened. Now we have the most dividing among fans, especially on how powerful Rey in the Star Wars, and also the Hunger Games, for example. And also we can see, of course, during the decade that we can see the Disney's domination through Star Wars and Marvel franchises. Dr. Ari just mentioned something related to this before, so I think I don't want to dwell on this more. And another one, we have saturated superheroes. I put saturated there because I'm a comic book fan. I'm a superheroes movie fans. But during the decades, then I didn't see that as enjoyable anymore for me to go to the movie to see superheroes, because there's just too many. A long time ago, you have to wait about a year or so, that with lots of anticipation, for example, that you would see another superheroes, and then you can have this anticipation. But during the 2010s, now we can see that nope, we just came almost sometimes in a year that there are 2 superheroes. Then just said that I think I have skipped so many superheroes movies now, except Batman, because it's DC. And then, of course, revival of horror movies in any kinds of its subgenres, and end up blockbuster documentaries. So there is no more blockbuster documentary as made before, but we can see a small budget movie documentaries such as The Act of Killing. Anyone who's from Indonesia must be familiar with this, because this is a story about the killing of the 1965s of the so-called the communist followers at the time. And then also we go back into this post-apocalyptic wastelands with Oblivion, Elysium, Interstellar, Passengers, Alien, and Covenants, on how we see this, the reality that is still there. Now, I think to close this, this is just a closing from me on how we treat the source materials, on how the reality that we have. I'm a big fan of these comic books, Lone Wolf and Cub, and how it has been adapted and also taken into the works of Hollywood, and also in terms of the TV and also the animation too. The top left, you can see from the characters from the Lone Wolf and Cub was put in a Samurai Jack's animation series, and the top right is actually from the Samurai Champloo. And also, not to mention is that the Road to Perdition, and of course the acclaimed Mandalorian was actually taking the idea, and also some ideas from this comic books. So I think in conclusion, then I can just add, because okay, still got a couple of more minutes. Hopefully, Pa Ari will have time later to answer questions. So hyperreality is the reality in itself. So which means that an era is guided by models of reality without origins and the reference. I just made some connections about the perfections that we see from the media that was the content of the media that was broadcast to us 24/7, for example. And then that's just quite interesting, because in terms of the persuasion, for example, how persuasions now is really one of the faces of persuasion right now is the persuasion in the 24/7 saturated media world. So how can we persuade people, and how can you send messages and see that that's part of the things that we can have other people see as another reality that we want to achieve. And then we can see that the postmodern films, usually we can see that for visuals, voicemail, images, styles, and specific effect. And some argue that they're more important than the story material characterization. Of course, this one is subject to more discussion and debate, because we can see that some of the movies that came later actually really good narrative plot, for example, especially if we look into a movie by M. Night Shyamalan, for example, with The Sixth Sense, for example. One of the what is it? I think is we can see the plot twist in The Sixth Sense, for example, could equal with the plot twist in The Empire Strikes Back. And then we can see that many successful film, we can see that some of them is quite. We can also learn that some of the movies that we have probably seen is actually have created the reality, and try to sort of give us some parts of what real and what is not. So going back to the very first questions that was posed in our sessions, then whether or not hyperreality in contemporary Hollywood is a rework of history or a masterful constructions of reality, then I would probably say that it's a little bit of both. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. Then I'm just going to stop my presentation, stop sharing, and then just leave it to Pari. Thank you.
Actually, I'll put it back, give it back to the moderator. Please, anyone who would like to have questions, we're gonna be very happy and delighted to have a discussion here. Please.
Okay, I think I got questions from Ibu Dr. Harsinta about Squid Game and others. Yeah, I think Korean movies and TV series now have actually contributed to the discussions on hyperreality. Especially now, we can see on how Korean are presented in pop culture. And then especially with many young Indonesian female, for example, are so into what is it? The actors and also the singers from boys bands, for example, that actually create this hyper reality that is there. I remember that a good friend of mine accompanied her daughter to see BTS in Jakarta. So they took they came from out of town, and then she said that was a really an amazing show. And I think that we look at into and how the reality that is presented on the stage by any K-pop bands, be it BTS, for example, or Big Bang, and also Blackpink, for example, then we can also see that they have contributed to the hyper reality and the genre too. Although the genre is probably might be different from what we see in Hollywood, but we can see that South Korean movies now have actually contributed to on how we the world, especially the Western world, especially the American, to see the what is it, the Asian versions of what genre of movie is. If you remember that Parasite won the Oscars, was that 2 years ago? And also how Squid Game took the world by surprise, and then and that way that we can also see that I think that they also have contributed to this the creations of the hyper reality, especially in contributing to new genre and new ways of seeing reality on TV from non-Hollywood perspective. I'm not sure if I have answered your questions, but I will let Pari if you have anything else to add.
Thank you, Pak Rudi. Yeah, I think we are seeing more like a fusion, I would say. I'm not sure, yeah. A fusion between entertainment, reality, and a little more also journalism, where now people are acting like citizen journalists. When they saw something, they immediately took photograph or videos and then just share about it. And I think this whole new, I'm not sure how to call it, a normal perhaps, and it becomes like something like we're acceptable reality that it becomes, I don't know, like a weird version of Alice in Wonderland. You know, it's one of the oldest cartoon perhaps that talks about maybe to an extent of hyper reality, that what Alice was experiencing. It was like a hyper reality because he moves into a different setting every time she opened a new door or finding a new place, and each one has its own traits and different things that she saw there. So I think this world that we are seeing now is so different than the world that we have seen before, and a lot of it thanks to the media that has affect and influence us. Our paper here, I mean, like sort of work here together was we started from when we were intrigued to see like a series like Mandalorian, which was a through and through an American Hollywood product, but it was like step by step imitating a Japanese comic, which was not kind of weird. It's kind of weird. Of course, it's not new because Akira Kurosawa Seven Samurai was remade into Magnificent Seven, and Hollywood was known to do the recycling. But this trend of reinventing things is something more and more common these days. Like we are seeing a new version of Batman. I think there will be like 3 or 4 different versions in the last 20 years, perhaps 25 years, and definitely we see that Spider-Man, the last one that brought in all characters of Spider-Man and all the villains. It's like what the Hollywood is thinking, but exactly. I mean, like they were trying to tell us perhaps that there's nothing bigger right now than this fight or battle about reality, and it becomes like, the Gulf War, for instance, was said that like an Atari war. I mean, because it was almost like for people who are not in the war, but like seeing it's like seeing a war in a computer game. So it was as if it's not as if there's people are not hurting or dying there, but because we are so accustomed to computer game, then we thought like, oh yeah, it's just like that. So I think we are highlighting this new phenomenon where this whole new reality are being produced, created, nurtured, used, reflected, and interacted in a way that it's just not different, but more than we have ever seen before. I don't know. That's my take about this. I'm not sure if it makes sense or answer Ibu Hersinta's comment or not, but I think that's my view about it. Thank you. Please, anyone else would like to give comments or questions, perhaps?
Yeah,
please, Pak.
I think I just want to add something, Pak Ari, because you just mentioned about Alice in Wonderland, and what's really interesting is that in the movie The Matrix, it was actually there was a reference to Alice in Wonderland, because when Neo was
The rabbit hole.
something, and then
The rabbit hole. The rabbit hole.
Oh, the rabbit, yes, the rabbit.
The rabbit
yeah, the rabbit hole, yeah.
The rabbit hole,
The
yes.
rabbit hole, when just they said that how deep and how far the hole the rabbit hole is, and it's actually quite interesting on how this reference was made, and then in some other sources that's to create this reality that's actually different from what Neo is experiencing. So yeah.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt the flow of the discussion, but we are going out of time, so we need to wrap up. If anyone wants to ask anything, should rush for that. Should ask quickly, because in 5 minutes we are to start another session. As I said, I hate to interrupt this discussion because I was enjoying so much. So any more question or talking points? Okay, probably everyone felt threatened.
Maybe tired.
Yeah.
Maybe exhausted. There were so many that we discussed. Thank you so much, though, for having us here. We really appreciate it. It's we are honored. And if it's anyone would like to have a discussion in a different time, yes.
Yeah.
There's one question in the chat room.
Oh, sorry. One question in the chat room.
Because I'm in a flu.
I think there are 2 questions in the chat box.
What has changed and provoked and controlled alleviate the fake news? Okay, I'll do it very quick. Yeah, I think what's alleviate, changed and provoke is the changes in the society. Our society has changed because of so many things. Like, in my personal opinion, what happened with the pandemic, the economy, the livelihood of people has changed significantly, and this is affecting us so deeply, and that's why it's like I remember there was a comic of Star Wars. It was like talking about the character that that can turn into a subhuman when they were deprived of a certain type of thing or provoked into certain, but they become subhuman. And the comic talk about a human can become human-like, can become subhuman and almost like primal. And in this case, I think the situation is also because of the condition of the world has pushed us into situation that's really difficult and made us kind of loose with the norms that we had before. I mean, that's a very short version about it. Sorry about it. Thank you.
Yeah, the time is against us. So yeah,
So far.
we need to be satisfied with the short version for now, and hope Dr. Adi and Dr. Rudi, we will have the opportunity to listen to the longer versions some point in time.
Sure. We will be happy.
Yeah,
we'll be happy about it.
It's been a pleasure both to listen to both of you, Dr. Adi and Dr. Rudi Sukandar. We are honored to have you here. We are so pleased to listen, and like you can see in the Zoom meeting that the number of participants still, at the end of a 90-minute session, we still have 80 participants in the Zoom meeting, and of course a lot of people are watching us on Facebook as well. So that actually tells how engaging this discussion was. So thank you so very much, Dr. Ari and Dr. Rudi, and of course our other colleagues from LSPR who presented a very intriguing panel last evening on day 2. And let us go for the closure of this session, and let us conclude with this hope that in near future we'll have more such conversations where we can learn more from you, Dr. Adi, Dr. Shushan, Dr. Rudi, and other colleagues. We can exchange our knowledge and experience. And so we are almost at the time to start another session. So we would request you to allow us for a few minutes so that we can prepare for the broadcast of the next session. And when we return, we will have a roundtable discussion on media and identity construction. So till then, goodbye.